It's been a long time coming, but at long last, I am sitting down and making a Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation light novel review on Volume 1 to be exact. Now, to just clarify a few things, okay? This light novel review will be obviously covering the entirety of the first volume. My overall thought process, comparing it to the anime since I started off as an anime only, talking about maybe some subtle foreshadowing with what it sets up for the future of the story, at least from what I know from the anime, stuff like that. And after reading the first light novel and really just getting to see the core differences and also the similarities of the anime, it really does make me respect the amount of effort that was put in to the anime project of Mushoku Tensei, and that it's not every day that I can just, before I even talk about the light novel, just can say that the anime really did the best it absolutely could with what it had to work with, and it truly is a good anime adaptation. It is not perfect, but it definitely is something that I wish most light novel to anime adaptations would try to be like, because it really showcases how much passion was put into the anime after I read the light novel of Mushoku Tensei. So with that out of the way, let's dive head first right into it. So let's talk about some core differences and stuff that, was not in the anime or things that was presented differently in the light novel in comparison to the anime. And the biggest difference right at the start of the story is how Rudy dies. Now, this is obviously something that's going to come as a surprise, because, how is this really important? Because, with everything else that happens within the story, because most of the story is pretty much after Rudy's death, so what's the point in the death scene being a little bit different? Well, it just goes to show the contrast and maybe how censorship is used within anime format, and that's what I think really happened with Rudy's death sequence, and why it's different from the anime to the light novel, is because of censorship reasons. However, I will say, thanks to the censorship, it does make the scene in the anime actually better, in my opinion. I actually really like the way the anime handled it with the censorship and how Rudy was going back and forth between his old world to his new world with his subconscious. If you go back to the first episode, you'll see it for yourself. It's a really interesting way they handle that, of how Rudy's shifting into a baby body to how he was in his adult body, and it's a really nice way to show how he's getting adjusted to the new world. And so, what is the difference? Well, as I said, it was censored, and the reason for that is because Rudy's death at the beginning of the light novel, he dies getting literally pancaked, squashed like a vegetable or watermelon up against a wall. You can imagine how violent that basically is in your head. And so because of that, it makes sense why they didn't show that in the anime. It makes perfect sense. And I feel like the liberties that the team took with animating, Rudy's overall death in the anime was, in my opinion, actually superior. I think it was a very tasteful change, which goes into what I just said, that when it comes to adapting things, I really love what the team did for the anime. But obviously, let's talk about it a little bit more. So obviously one of the biggest distinctions from, let's say, an anime to a light novel is being able to get inside of a character's head. That is one of the core differences for any light novel. It isn't just a Mushoku Tensei thing, it's for any light novel. Any light novel you sit down and you want to read, and then you look at, let's say, its adapted source, you'll notice that there really isn't a lot of inner monologues for the characters. You won't really get to see what they're thinking at all points in time, like how a light novel will. And this isn't just for, let's say, anime, manga, or light novels. This also goes for, let's say, just books in general that are adapted into live-action movies or TV series. Stuff like this happens, because it is very hard to adapt someone's inner psyche, their mind and all that, and their thoughts in an actual setting of movement. It's much easier to do it in writing that's able to expand upon the overall character's thought process. So obviously there is core distinctions between the two forms of writing a story. However, I do really love how we get so much more insight to Rudy's character, and I do want to make a major point at this before I go any further, that in terms of the differences, even though I'm going to be pointing out some differences here, I think the anime gets across everything that needed to get across within the show. I think in terms of adaptation, it's almost perfect. It's almost perfection in terms of getting everything important across and the feelings you should feel to the characters, their motivations, everything. I feel like everything, the way the anime did it, was spot on, even with the lack of inner monologue. That is something I do want to say before I go any further. Now, obviously, the light novel does expand upon the character personalities and stuff, and so if you want to know more about the characters and why they might end up with, like, the end objective of their personality, like how they are in the story, then obviously the light novel will give you more build up to that. So to talk about the inner psyche of Rudy, I feel like the first volume really gives you so much you need to know from his character, from his starting point to how his gradual change is throughout the story. Now, obviously, as someone that is reading the light novel, the first volume, I know how Rudy's character turns out, like, in terms of the anime. I have finished the first season, and so I know where Rudy is. I know where he will be as a person in the future. I know the outcome. I know about all of that, and just in case some of you may have not watched the anime or maybe have read ahead in the volumes or whatever, I'm not going to spoil that. However, I will say that I like seeing just how different Rudy's development is. Like, just he's become such a different person in the later volumes, and in the anime as well, and I really appreciate that development. Starting from ground zero and seeing where his character is at the end is just impressive writing skills, and I really just cannot commend Mushoku Tensei enough for that. But we gotta talk about Rudy's overall beginning point. So Rudy, as a character, at least in Volume 1, he's kinda scummy. He is. Like, the way he overall reacts to some characters, for instance, like Selfie, or, what he does in some cases with some female characters, he has this scummy nature to his personality. And it's not something you could just say isn't there. It is there. That is a part of his personality, and he is like that. And it is obviously a flaw in his character. 100%, you cannot deny it. And one of the big things that the first volume wants to point out is that Rudy is a flawed character. And so is Paul. And I think one of the big things that this volume does for Rudy as a character is allow him to see that nature, that very distasteful nature of just eyeing up and being a womanizer, it isn't necessarily going to get you very, very far in life. Because of what he saw at a very young age, obviously, in his new life, seeing what his father figure, Paul, has done, and his actions and the repercussions of it, and then he continuously is reminded of how scumbaggery his father is, at least how he sees him. Rudy doesn't want to be like his father. He doesn't want to actually be like him at all, and he's learning from Paul's mistakes, Paul's examples throughout his early childhood within the volume of Mushoku Tensei, that he doesn't want to be like Paul. He doesn't want to be like his father figure. He doesn't really view him in a very good light, because he's gotten to see his father figure literally cheat on his wife, have an affair, potentially break up their family, and tear the very foundations of their family apart, to seeing him just chasing after skirts, or his stories of chasing after skirts, to him not really being able to listen to Rudy, and literally the way he disciplined Rudy when Rudy tried to help out Selfie. There's many examples of Paul not really being a good father figure, and I'll talk more about that in a moment, but the point is that Rudy, from his perspective, from Volume 1, he doesn't view Paul in a good light. He doesn't view him in any way, shape, or form as a very, very honorable person. He may respect him to some degree because it is his father, but overall, he doesn't really think that Paul is a good person, to just clarify. And so he doesn't want to be like Paul, so we get to see the initiation, the beginnings of change, where Rudy is realizing he doesn't want to go down the route that he once lived back in his previous life. He doesn't want to be like his father figure Paul. He wants to be a better person and change himself. And obviously this is going to take volumes, many volumes for him to fully go through this change, because at any point or time he can rebound to become what he once was, which you see many examples of this throughout the first volume, which is one of the big core reasons to why, you know, he had to be separated from Selfie, which there is a little bit of difference there, and I'll talk more about that in a second, but we get to see a lot of things to where Rudy, he just is trying to be better. He's trying to be better as a person, and I really like how the first volume sets all of that up rather nicely. Now, I want to talk about Paul, since I've already on the subject of him. One of the big things that the first light novel volume does is dive heavily into Paul's mind. Now, obviously, with a light novel, this is common sense. You get a lot more inner thoughts, as I talked about already in this video, for a character. But Paul, seeing his POV is something that quite shocked me. I did not expect to get Paul's perspective on Rudy like I did while reading the first volume, because everything I got from the first volume was what you get later on in the story for the anime, around episode 15, episode 16, with Rudy and Paul's meetup and all that. You know, everything we learned there with, you know, Paul, you know, you learn early on in the first volume, and it's a huge, just, shock. It's like, whoa, I cannot believe I got all of this about Paul's character, his characterization, how he felt about being a parent, everything. It just came as quite a shock to me as a reader. I was just like, this is super freaking different and interesting, because it shows that Paul, he realizes he's a bad person, and he realizes he's a failure, and he wants to do better. And very early on, Mushoku Tensei wants to show you that every character within the story is flawed. They are not perfect. They are not some perfect entity that is able to accomplish everything, say everything right, and do everything right. That is not this type of story. That is not what Mushoku Tensei is. And seeing Paul's perspective on his overall thoughts is fascinating, because when he looks at Rudy, he looks at someone that already seems like an adult. He already seems like someone that knows what he's doing. He's so gifted, and Paul feels like he can't do anything to offer his child, because his child just seems so mature, so intelligent, and it's not his fault, because Rudy obviously has been reincarnated. And it's a very fascinating depiction of this, basically seeing a parent struggling being a parent, because how do you parent someone that's technically already an adult, but you're unaware of this, and it's their first time at parenting? You're going to feel like you're a failure. And Paul feels like he's a failure throughout the first volume. He feels like he's just a bad father. He can't really teach Rudy, or even really do the role as a father, trying to help his son learn from his mistakes, because his son doesn't really make many mistakes. And in a lot of areas, Paul is the one learning from Rudy, which is just super interesting, and definitely not something you would expect from that type of relationship with, like, a parent and son relationship. It's just not something you would ever expect to see, and I think that's something that nobody would be prepared for, and Paul definitely wasn't, and he feels inferior, and he feels like, you know, there's just nothing he can do. And this kind of goes into his backstory of how he ran away from his father. He ran away from his family at the age of 12 to become his own man, to be an adventurer, to one day get a wife, be with Zenith, have a child, and do the right thing. And everything about his character shows that he didn't want to be like his father. He did not want to be what his old man did to him, being overbearing and just crush him down to the ground, etc. He didn't want to be that type of father to Rudy. But, however, it's very interesting that Rudy gets that same impression. He doesn't want to be like his father, Paul. And this kind of goes along with it, and obviously mistakes happen. And I think one of the biggest things is that at an early age, sometimes children pick up that they may not want to be exactly like their parents, and they want to learn from their overall example, like, you know, not do what they actually do. And I think that's very fascinating by the way the story presents that, of how even though Rudy and Paul, Rudy wants to be different from Paul, they are lining up to be very, very similar in a lot of different areas, and that's very interesting. And I like Paul's perspective throughout the first volume, because it gives him so much more to his character that you never understood until obviously later on in the anime. I appreciate what I got with that. I appreciate the POV perspective and shift, not just from Rudy's POV, like his worldview, but Paul's worldview. Lilia's worldview, and also Zenith's worldview, which that is a perfect segue to talk about just how the world views Rudy. Not Rudy viewing the world, but how the world views Rudy. I think that is a very big detail that really comes to play towards the end of the first volume. So Zenith, she has an extra chapter that is at the end of the first volume, and this extra chapter wasn't really in the anime. Now, it was kind of placed in towards the end of the show of the first season, but it's still very different in comparison to the way it was presented in the light novel, because I'm willing to talk about that, okay? I want to talk about the differences between the scene, the extra chapter from the light novel, but also the scene that was towards the end of the first season. See, in the end of the first season, when we see the extra chapter kind of adapted in its own way, the impression you get from Zenith and how she appears to be very tired, she pricks her finger and all that, you see blood come out of her finger, and Rudy's helping her take care of, the kids and all that. You get this impression that Zenith is really worn down and that she's not doing so hot. Like, her life force is draining rather quickly. Like, she won't be around for much longer. That is the general impression you get from Zenith in the anime, towards the end, when we got that scene added in at the end of Season 1. However, like I said, the scene's technically in the first volume of Mushoku Tensei. And the way it's presented in the light novel, it's presented as, yes, she's worn down, she's tired, and she feels like she's going to have a panic attack taking care of 2 kids, but she's able to continuously move on and be better as a mother, and just, she understands that her son loves her and everything because Rudy is there helping her out when she needs it, and because of that, she's able to continue moving forward. And like I said, the overall presentation of these 2 scenes from the anime and the light novel is just so different. Like I said, I got a doom and gloom vibe from the anime, but from the light novel, I get more of an uplifting vibe that Rudy being born in the world has really benefited Paul, really benefited Zenith, really benefited Lilia, and also, Lilia, and also benefited, Aisha and Norn. His overall presence is beneficial to people. He isn't dragging them down and bringing them down into the mud. He is uplifting their very life. And if you look at the beginning of the volume, obviously from his previous life, Rudy was dragging his family down. He wasn't really doing anything to help them out, make them have a better life or anything. He was a constant drag on their very life, regardless of how you want to put it, and he wasn't really offering anything that would bring them a smile. So obviously there is a big distinction between the themes, that Rudy, at the end of the chapter, he is bringing life to the family, bringing life to this new world, while at the end of his old life, he wasn't. So that was definitely the main theme, or what the writer wanted you to feel when you finished the first light novel volume. But once again, like I said, it's fascinating to me that they cut that chapter out, or at least that segment of the story out, and added it at the end of Season 1. I guess in its own way, it makes sense thematically, if you think about it, because for the anime, its beginning, obviously, the anime, Rudy was a drag on society. And then at the end of the anime, he no longer was. And I guess they treated the entirety of the anime as maybe, like, example, a light novel, the first volume. And it was just one big light novel volume. That's how they presented it. And obviously, putting the scene at the end would just show how much Rudy has changed from his starting point. And I understand where they went with that, but like I said, the overall impressions or feelings I got from Zenith, I felt more doom and gloom from it, that even if Rudy is bringing life into the world and smiles, there is this ominous figure, this dark, ominous cloud looming over the horizon that you cannot see, that is coming for them. That is the impression I received at the end of the anime, but like I said, different in the light novel. Now, enough rambling on that, let's talk about Selfie. Selfie, interesting character, because one of the things about Selfie is that she is the childhood friend. She is the childhood friend that Rudy gets to meet at a very early age, and thanks to her, it's his first friend he's had in this new world. He's not really had a friend. I mean, you could count Roxy as a friend, but it's very different from a teacher-student relationship. you had Selfie and Rudy more in a very different role. They were actual close friends, childhood friends, learning from each other, and just being able to have a good time. And it's fascinating throughout the journey with Selfie, you can see that Selfie and Rudy get overly attached to each other, that they bond together, they become reliant on each other, and it becomes to the point to where Rudy is now willing to give up on his motivations, his aspirations to be better as a person, just to be with Selfie. And this shows the main contrast to what the volume has been trying to do for Rudy as a character, is that Rudy, he wants to go all in for his life. He wants to live life to the fullest. He doesn't want to, just say like, that's it, I'm gonna give up. He wants to go as far as he can, the very limit, and live as he should. And if he was to just stop thanks to Selfie, he would do the exact same mistake as he did in his previous life. Obviously, it'd be a little bit more wholesome, but overall, the point is it would go against what he set out to do from the beginning of the story. And I think that is a really huge detail, is that Rudy almost fell back into the very problems that he faced in his previous life. And so it makes a lot of sense why he had to be separated from Selfie, and why he had to take the journey to one day meet Eris, which will obviously continue in Volume 2 when I talk about it. So I love what the story tries to do, how it goes along with that theme that Rudy can easily go back into his old ways if he isn't steered constantly by people giving him that push on the back. And so it makes the final sequence of the anime even more fascinating because the way the anime ends. So I am curious on where that's going to go. But anyways, getting back on topic, one of the things that does need to be discussed as well is Roxy's involvement within Rudy's life. Now, this one is incredibly important, even if Roxy's overall role within the light novel is very brief, like, in terms of, like, Volume 1, she is still a very critical role, a very critical figure that is one of the individuals that allows Rudy to even stand up on his own 2 feet and be able to actually be where he's at in the next volumes and throughout the remainder of the series. Roxy is that figure that changed Rudy's life for the better. And what I mean by that is, it's not that she taught him magic, it's not that she able to inspire him to continue to learn, it's the fact that she was the one that grabbed him, picked him up, and forced him outside to be able to finally leave the confines of his house and actually journey and not be a shut-in anymore. It was a very big moment for Rudy as a person to be able to overcome that PTSD, that trauma he had in the early stages of his life in his previous life. And him being able to do that thanks to Roxy's help is very beautiful. And I think it's very important to see Rudy's perspective on it, is that Roxy was the one that helped him. It wasn't his parents from the previous life, his siblings from the other life. It wasn't even Zenith and Paul in this life. It wasn't Lilia. It was Roxy. Someone that was just his teacher grabbed him and dragged him out. And even though it seems so small, such a simple little thing, Roxy grabbing him, picking him up, and dragging him outside, the point is that something so simple can save somebody. And that's what's really important about that scene, and I love Roxy's role in the story. Easily one of my favorite characters because of what she does for Rudy as a person. Now, in terms of magic capabilities, I think the magic is super fascinating as well, because obviously Roxy, just as much as she's the teacher to Rudy, Rudy's in some way a teacher to Roxy, because Roxy felt she reached a point in her life where she hit a wall, that she no longer could learn, she no longer could be anything better than what she was. But obviously after meeting Rudy and making her feel a little bit inferior in some degrees, she realized that she had much to learn. She had more ways she can go about and learn things, and so she journeys off after she's done teaching Rudy to be a better mage. And I think that's a very important scene, is that just as how at the end of the light novel, for instance, Rudy is shoved away thanks to Paul's meddling to have him go on a journey, Roxy also does that as well, is that they were about to hit a wall, or they felt they hit a wall, and they couldn't improve or become anything better, but there was ways. They just had to actually think outside the box and do it, and that's exactly what happened. So it's a really thought-provoking way everything turns out, with the similarities of Roxy to Rudy and Paul. There's a lot of things that coexist with each other throughout the first volume. So since I'm already on the topic of magic, I guess I should talk about the magic system in of itself. The magic is very detailed within the light novel. Like, obviously, the anime couldn't cover everything, but it's very clear that the light novel really goes into depth with all the different details of how magic is used, how Rudy can pour magic in the fire to make it just supercharged and heated continuously, which raises some eyebrows, especially for the anime content, to also stuff with just like the size and how he can manipulate things, just stuff like that. There's a lot of little details that is crammed into the light novel about the magic system that honestly I was really happy to be able to see. Now, I knew for a fact that when it comes to anime adaptations, they can't show everything, and what the anime did, they did the best they possibly could. And for a clarification, we all know that when Season 2 of Mushoku Tensei comes out, they're gonna be going to the Magic University. It's clear as day that's where the story is going to be going, especially with that ending sequence at the end of Season 1. So because of that thought in of itself, everything that was obviously excluded from the anime from Season 1 of Mushoku Tensei is probably going to be added when Rudy goes to the Magic University, because that would be the perfect time to do it, since he's going to be going to a magic school, diving into the fundamentals of magic and everything, and letting everybody know exactly how the magic system works. So I feel like anything that was kind of cut from the anime that wasn't in, but was in the first volume, will be added at a later date. So it isn't that big of an issue, but it is still nice getting to see some of the details that I was unaware of, or expand upon some of the ideas of what Rudy is actually capable of, and what eventually he will be capable of in the future of the actual story. So I do love the expanded magic. There is so much to dive into with it, with how it's applied, to how he can create thunderstorms, to how he uses literal science to use his magic, and it explains more in depth why he can use incantationless magic, but also why he can't actually use incantationless healing. It's a big detail about it. Like, for instance, if he was, let's say, a doctor, and he was actually able to comprehend, like, the science behind being a doctor and how cells probably heal, etc., he probably could do incantationless healing magic. But it explains why he definitely cannot do that in the story. But at the same time, it explains why he's able to use fire, why he's able to create thunderstorms, etc., because he understands the science of, like, heating up temperatures, evaporation, air, current, etc., to be able to cause things like that. So there is a lot of details thrown in with the magic system that expands upon Rudy's knowledge to show that, once again, that thanks to his previous experience, he's able to use that knowledge and apply it in this new world, which is another thing too. Rudy doesn't feel like he's better than anyone. As much as it seems like he's gifted, as much as it seems like he is special, he in fact is not special. And that's something that the series really wants to pin down in your head, and Rudy continuously repeats throughout the first volume that he doesn't feel like he's special. He feels at one point he might be, but then he's like, no, erase that thought, because he feels like there's other people out there that potentially can do incantationless magic, other people that can, actually do vast amounts of magic more than he can, different things like that. He doesn't want to feel like he's special, and obviously his suspicions are confirmed because Selfie is able to do the very things that he's capable of, like expand her magic capabilities, but also do incantationless magic. So there's a lot of things to take away as well. That Rudy's mindset, he doesn't want to feel like he's better than people, even though throughout the story, other characters feel like Rudy might think that way. For instance, Zenith might think that way, Paul might think that way, Lilia earlier on in the story might think that way, and so it's nice to see that little bit thrown in there showing that Rudy is trying to, once again, be different than how he was in his previous life, because he felt like he was a higher morals, he was an upstanding individual before he was knocked down to the ground. He feels like he's a beginner. He doesn't feel like he's an advanced, saint level class mage. He doesn't feel that way. So that is a core distinction that the series wants to nail into your head while you read it. So overall, as you could see, I've went on quite the tangent with Mushoku Tensei Volume 1. There's so much. There's so many details, so many things to dive into. It's such a good read. Like, I would be lying to you if I said that there is not things obviously I'm forgetting about or not adding into this video because of just how much detail the first volume goes into. There's so much. There's literally so much. Like, there's so much foreshadowing with, like, Rudeus later on. There's foreshadowing with the Dragon God. There's so much that's really foreshadowed throughout this first volume. It's ridiculous the amount of world building and set up that the writer did for Mushoku Tensei in such the early stages of the story. It's impressive, honestly. It's very impressive how he used the first volume to give us all this character development, all this characterization, and set up a world that is still being used from the first volume in volumes probably later on, 15, 20 volumes later on. That is what I call incredible writing. And so, that was my first volume review of Mushoku Tensei. I don't normally do light novel reviews. Hopefully this video turned out well. As I said a while back, I am concerned I'm not going to be able to add in a lot of images since I'm going to be talking about a light novel, so please forgive me for the lack of images and stuff. I know many of you probably don't want to see my face talking constantly, but any of you that did stick through it and listen to this video, I greatly appreciate it. I really do. I do this video out of my passion for Mushoku Tensei, and that's really the only reason. I wanted to talk about the light novel. I promised it a while back, and I wanted to talk about the series, and here I am. And so, even if this video only gets 1 view or even 0 views, I'm just happy to be able to talk about this series. That is my biggest thing about it. And so if there is anyone out there that has finished this video and watched to the end, even if it is rather lengthy, I think this is going to be a 30+ minute video, or when I edit it might be less. But regardless of how long this video is, if you did somehow manage to make it here, I greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much. I really, really do appreciate all of you out there. And do not worry, you won't have to wait that long for a second volume review. For instance, Light Novel Volume 2 for Mushoku Tensei. I want to have it up sometime next week. So, do look forward to that. Thank you so much, everybody. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, suggestions, etc. Anything that you want me to add into this or whatever, I would greatly appreciate it. But with that, everybody, be safe, stay healthy. Chibi out.